Deep within the Vatican, where even light dares not reach, lies a nameless room, known only by a symbol. Number 114. Inside, resting quietly in a dust-covered oak box, untouched for centuries, is a strange scroll sealed, with two marks of red wax, one from the Knights Templar, the other from the Order of Assassins. Why would two sworn enemies sign the same document? Why has the Vatican kept it, yet never revealed it? And why did the last person who tried to decode the scroll vanish without a trace? We were taught the Templars were holy warriors and the assassins ghost-like killers spreading fear. But what if both were just two sides of the same game? What if they once sat at the same table, not to fight but to bargain with the Pope himself? History holds blank spaces no one dares to fill. What you're about to hear won't be found in any textbook. It's the part of the truth someone has worked for 1,000 years to keep hidden from you. There's something few people ever noticed. The Knights Templar didn't begin with power. They began with faith. Or at least what was believed to be faith. In the year 1119, amid the ruins left behind by the First Crusade, 9 French knights gathered in Jerusalem with a single mission: to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They took vows of poverty, lived in a monastery, ate modestly, and called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, because they were housed on the ancient foundations of King Solomon's temple. At first glance, they seemed more like armed monks than warriors, but that quickly began to change. As pilgrims placed their trust in them, so did kings. What started as simple escorts turned into something more. The Templars began safeguarding the pilgrims' valuables, and before long they controlled treasure, land, and a money transfer network stretching from England to Jerusalem, a medieval financial system run by sword-bearing monks. From a military order, the Templars evolved into the first true bank in European history. And with money came a shift in loyalty. Though sworn to obey the Pope, the Templars answered to no king. While monarchs needed loans to fund their wars, the Templars had enough wealth to raise their own armies. In the shadows, they built massive stone fortresses, hid documents, maps, and relics. No one knew exactly what they guarded, only that once something was placed beneath their red cross, even the King of France couldn't touch it. More surprising still, all of this unfolded under the watchful eye of the Church. And yet the Vatican couldn't stop them, because the Templars weren't just warriors for Christ. They were also the silent bankers behind the Crusades. A quiet alliance had formed between spiritual authority and military power. But as with all unchecked power, they went too far. Rumors began to spread. Whispers that Templar leaders were performing rituals not found in the Bible, rites older than Christianity itself. They said the candles inside their fortresses burned not for prayer, but to summon something that lived beyond faith. And just as the Templars seemed untouchable, the first signs of another force appeared. Not from the west, but from the mountain shadows of the Middle East. A secret order with no treasure, no fortresses, only daggers and the dark, the assassins. And that was not the first encounter. It was the first move, in a game that history never dared to record. While the Templars rose with the backing of kings and the Vatican, the assassins were born from exile, from a branch of faith branded as heresy, hidden deep in the mountains where light could barely reach. They didn't begin with bloodshed, but with an idea, the idea that faith should never be a tool of power, but a path to liberation from it. In the 11th century, the Islamic world was fracturing. Within the Shia Muslim community, a small offshoot known as the Ismailis was labeled heretical by Sunni rulers. Pushed into the shadows, the Ismailis built secret communities in remote, mountainous regions, far beyond the reach of armies. In one of these fortresses, deep in the Alborz mountains of Persia, a man appeared. His name was Hassan-i-Sabah, a scholar, a strategist, and, according to many secret records, the founder of the world's first true assassination order. Hassan had no army, no wealth, but he possessed something no one else could buy: absolute loyalty. He recruited young men and trained them in writing, philosophy, disguise, language, combat, and above all, the belief that dying for a noble mission was the highest honor. From this, an unofficial order emerged. They had no formal name, but their enemies whispered one in the dark: Hashashin, the assassins. They didn't wage war with soldiers. They used small, poisoned blades hidden in their sleeves. They didn't attack armies, only commanders. No need to kill thousands, just one strike at the right moment in the right place, and an entire campaign could collapse like dominoes. History remembers their infamous assassinations, from powerful Seljuk generals to Western Crusader lords. The assassins made no distinction between religions. If you threatened the balance, you became the target, and they always left a warning. A dagger beneath the pillow, a note carved with strange symbols. They didn't need to kill to spread fear. The terror lay in not knowing who was next. Even kings and bishops lost sleep. The Vatican learned of their presence early, and though publicly condemning them as heretics, secret letters, uncovered centuries later, reveal that some cardinals had once hired them because there were things even the Pope couldn't do openly. And then, as Templar fortresses began stretching into the Middle East, irony struck. The assassins and the Templars collided, not through war, but through a look. A silent understanding that neither of them belonged to the world outside. One thrived on state-backed faith. The other survived on a faith the state tried to erase. But both manipulated history in their own ways. There is a tale buried in an old Latin manuscript that one moonlit night in 1173, a Templar knight was led to the fortress of Masyaf, the assassin's stronghold. No one knows what was said, only that, after that night, a wave of assassinations across Europe abruptly stopped. Some call it the first silent pact between the two orders, a truce that has never been confirmed, yet can't be denied. And so, those once believed to be sworn enemies began to coexist in silence, in the shadows under the watching eye of the Vatican. There was once a strange coincidence that left historians puzzled. Many Templar strongholds were built just a few days' journey from key assassin bases, sometimes separated by nothing more than a single mountain range. In an age where every faction clashed in blood and fire, such peaceful coexistence could hardly be a matter of chance. Take Chastel Blanc, a Templar fortress near Latakia. It stood only a few watch hours through the mountain pass from Kirkush, a secondary contact point for the assassins, a proximity far too convenient to ignore. As early as the 12th century, Western records began noting something odd. There were no major battles between the two orders, no purges, no declarations of war, no official bloodshed. But why? Two organizations, two faiths, two opposing ideologies, and yet no attempt to annihilate one another? There is only one plausible explanation. They met and made an agreement. Yet you'll find no trace of this in any official church document. All records hinting at a possible link between the Templars and the assassins have vanished from the Vatican archives. The diaries, letters, and dispatches that should have been preserved by papal decree now survive only as scattered fragments buried in lost private collections. But in 1947, during an archaeological dig in the ancient city of Byblos, researchers discovered a fragment of goatskin parchment, a map. On it, military insignias of both the Templars and the assassins overlapped in the Bekaa Valley. No explanation. No annotations. Just a single point, as if two currents had merged into one underground river. And then there was the handwritten Latin scroll found hidden in a monastery wine cellar in France, referring to an unnamed meeting between the bearer of the cross and the keeper of the blade. in 1171, somewhere in the desert near Palmyra. Most of the text has faded, only one line remains. "We did not find difference, we found purpose." Some scholars dismiss it as legend, but if so, why did the Vatican in 1226 issue a decree forbidding the copying or storage of any document bearing the seals of both orders? The coincidences kept adding up. Lost records, buried alliances, and one truth impossible to ignore. While the world burned in the chaos of the Crusades between the Templars and the Assassins, there was only silence. A silence that wasn't forgetfulness, but design. They once said, "There is no peace without an agreement," so the question is no longer, did they ever meet? But rather, when did they meet? And what did they do together? The most terrifying truths in history aren't the ones that were never written, but the ones that were written and then forced to disappear. Throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, as the Crusades rocked both the Middle East and Europe, something strange began to surface. Certain high-profile assassinations attributed to the assassins suspiciously aligned with political moments that directly benefited the Roman Church. The mysterious deaths of Western lords who opposed the Vatican, independent-minded reformist priests, and even Muslim leaders who blocked papal negotiations, all eliminated swiftly, cleanly, and with no one claiming responsibility. Centuries later, scattered traces began to reappear, not in the grand halls of the Vatican Library, but in modest monasteries across Switzerland, Persia, and Armenia, secret copies that should have been burned, somehow survived. Among them, one stood out, a faded 14th century manuscript written in a mix of Latin and ancient Persian. The letter bore two distinct seals. One, a papal mark, slightly imperfect. The other, a crescent moon entwined with a twin-blade insignia that believed to be the mark of the assassin leaders. The content didn't issue a direct order to kill, but the wording was unmistakably suggestive. He who stands between Jerusalem and truth should be guided to the other realm. Silence is the light of faith. Let darkness deliver the defiant to it. Many Western scholars dismiss the document as a forgery, but in a rare move, the Vatican itself issued a formal decree in 1743. All copies of this letter were to be confiscated immediately, even though the original was centuries old by then. If it were truly a fake, why fear it? Elsewhere, in records of the Maronite order in the mountains of Lebanon, one monk wrote, "Some envoys of the Holy See crossed the Mediterranean to meet those called heretics, but in truth they were bearers of the final solution." That solution clearly didn't come from prayer. It came from a blade, hidden in shadow, one the Vatican could never hold in its own hand, but could quietly rent. The assassins, long condemned as heretics by church orthodoxy, had become a silent tool, as long as no one ever found out. The Vatican never officially acknowledged this, but the selective disappearance of the Pope's enemies and the mysterious survival of assassin strongholds deep inside Crusader territory remain unspoken evidence. In the darkness, the letters kept moving, not by official messengers, but by unnamed carriers appearing at night and vanishing before dawn. Their names were never written down, but their fingerprints are all over history. And perhaps because of those letters, even to this day, the Vatican refuses to unseal certain ancient vaults, rooms that only 3 people in recorded history were ever allowed to enter. So the question is no longer, did they ever communicate, but rather, what did they use each other for? That history had to stay silent for 800 years. History has never been kind to organizations that didn't belong to a throne, a dynasty, or a sanctioned faith. So why did 2 forces once branded as heretical and dangerous, the Templars and the Assassins, not only survive, but thrive for centuries? The answer lies in something simple and dangerous. They were loyal to no one except their own mission. The assassins were the nightmare of every orthodox Islamic empire. They struck at rulers, rejected traditional Sharia law, and built their faith not on dogma, but on personal reflection. They weren't after land. They aimed at the minds that ruled it. To them, the timely death of a king was worth more than 10,000 soldiers, and the Templars, they were the greatest threat to Europe's monarchies. They had money, they had armies, they had fortresses, and more dangerously, they answered to no king. Officially, they obeyed the Pope, but over time, even that became symbolic. They were the bankers behind the Crusades, and at one point, the King of France owed them so much, he didn't dare touch them, and that is why both were hated. One rejected the structures of political rule, the other controlled more land and gold than the royal houses combined. To both Islamic and Christian empires, they were thorns in the side of power, but precisely because they didn't belong to anyone, they became useful to everyone. A king needed funds. They provided loans. A pope needed a rival silenced. They delivered a message. Armies needed maps. They handed over intelligence from their hidden networks. Merchants wanted protection. They offered armed escorts. The Templars and the assassins were like blades hidden in every empire's sleeve, hated by all, yet discarded by none. Because without them, the world spun slower, grew more chaotic, and slipped out of control. They both knew this, and that's why they survived. Not by overwhelming force, but by becoming indispensable in a world spinning on the edge. There were even times when kings publicly condemned them by day, but sent messengers to their fortresses at night to handle private matters. It was a dangerous game, and they played it masterfully. So, despite the hatred, the labels of heresy, the rewritten histories made to paint them in shadow, the Templars and the assassins kept walking. No grand declarations, no banners, but always present in history's most decisive moments. Their survival was never granted. It was feared, because everyone knew he who kills an assassin will be watched for life. And he who betrays the Templars will never borrow another coin for as long as he lives. Acre, Tripoli, once centers of trade, faith, and bloodshed. But behind their ancient stone walls, it wasn't just prayers that echoed. There were also meetings, never recorded in any official chronicle. Conversations without names, without witnesses, and denied by everyone involved. According to banned manuscripts, sometime around 1192, as the Third Crusade entered its decline, a strange envoy was seen leaving the Templar fortress in Acre, heading south, toward the mountains held by the assassins. They carried no banners, no official escort, only a small iron box wrapped in black cloth. No one knew what was inside, but 2 weeks later, a European nobleman was suddenly assassinated in Jerusalem. At the time, the Templar leadership denied all involvement. Yet those present in Acre swore that the fortress remained lit throughout the night, a ritual reserved only for the highest-level councils. In Tripoli, the story deepens. In 1203, as both the assassins and the Templars faced growing threats, from new Byzantine and Mamluk alliances, whispers spread of a meeting held beneath an abandoned church. The usual gatekeepers were replaced by unknown knights, wearing no insignia. Highly unusual, for every Templar was required to bear the cross. That same night, a group believed to be from Masyaf's fortress slipped out of the city before sunrise, and by morning, the entire underground chamber they had occupied was sealed off. No one was allowed in, not even the local clergy. The official histories say nothing. But in a handwritten document discovered in the library of Alexandria, a Maronite monk wrote, "Two shadows met that night, not to reconcile, not to surrender, but to reset the board for the years to come." No one has ever publicly confirmed those meetings. There is no treaty, no seals, No oaths, only what came after. Strange deaths. Fortresses suddenly abandoned, maps quietly redrawn. And it is precisely this ambiguity that inspires fear, because if two of history's most feared enemies truly met, not to kill each other, but to cooperate, then what in this world can ever be certain? The Vatican never acknowledged it. Yet, it quietly confiscated all materials referencing the strange talks in Acre and Tripoli. Monks who wrote about the mysterious envoys were reassigned to distant monasteries, or simply vanished from the records. The truth lies buried beneath layers of dust and time. No one dares to confirm it, but no one dares to deny it either. And so these meetings live on, like faint cracks in the stone walls of history. Faint enough to be ignored, but clear enough to remind us that something did happen, something no one wants to speak of. For centuries, the Templars and the Assassins were seen as eternal enemies, divided by faith, by ideology, by blood. They never crossed paths without leaving a trail of death, and yet there was one moment in history, one moment only, when these two irreconcilable forces stepped back in the same direction. When the hooves of the Mongol Empire began storming across the sacred lands of Islam and threatened even the Crusader strongholds of the Middle East, a chilling truth emerged. Neither the Templars nor the Assassins could survive alone. The Mongols weren't a dynasty, they were a storm. They didn't care for holy lands, sacred texts, or religious disputes. They erased everything: villages, scriptures, temples, and left behind only silence. When Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, invaded Persia and Iraq, he burned the library of Baghdad, slaughtered hundreds of thousands of civilians, and plunged the Islamic world into horror. But what shook Europe was the rumor that Hulagu wasn't going to stop there. And so strange letters began to move. Some were recorded as being sent from Templar fortresses in Tortosa to the high mountains of Syria, territory held by the Assassins. Their contents were never revealed, but only weeks later several assassin outposts were suddenly abandoned, their forces redirected east toward where the Mongols were expected to advance. In a document later banned by the Vatican, a handwritten Latin line was found: "When the wind blows from the north, the blade and the cross must face it together." No one ever declared it an alliance. There was no treaty, no handshake witnessed by history. But during the siege of Baghdad in 1258, several eyewitnesses claimed to have seen white-cloaked knights bearing the cross, fighting beside Muslim warriors, curved daggers in hand. They didn't speak, they didn't remain after the battle, but they fought side by side, as if they had known one another all along, perhaps because they both understood the Mongols weren't a power to negotiate with. They were destruction made real. And if left unchecked, faith and ambition, gold and philosophy, would all be reduced to ash. When Hulagu finally withdrew from the Middle East, called back to Mongolia by the death of the great Khan Munka, silence returned. The Assassins returned to their mountains. The Templars withdrew into their fortresses. No one spoke of the days they fought together. It was as if both sides knew that moment was meant to live only in the memory of stone and bone. No records, no medals, no legend. The Vatican, as always, said nothing, but soon after, documents about the Mongols were quietly removed from the Vatican library, and a monk was quietly tried for falsifying Eastern historical records. Once again, the truth was buried. But those who survived the Mongol storm knew one thing for certain. In that darkness there were handshakes that no one ever dared to see. If the Templars were the sword shaped like a cross and the Assassins were the hidden dagger in the dark, then the Vatican was the hand beneath the robe, guiding them both, leaving no trace. In nearly every major conflict of the medieval world, the Vatican was present, but not on the battlefield, not on the war maps. Their power moved through long, narrow corridors, where a whisper could decide the fate of an entire empire. We've long believed the Vatican despised the assassins, for they were heretics, and needed the Templars, for they fought for the faith. But look deeper, and something strange begins to surface. When the Templars became too powerful, the Vatican betrayed them, and when the assassins were hunted to the edge of extinction, the Vatican said nothing. Were they truly on no one's side? Or were they above both, a masterful director pulling the strings from behind the curtain? In secret manuscripts from the 13th century, copied by exiled Jesuit monks, one chilling line appears: the keeper of the temple's key and the bearer of Masyaf's blade. Both stood before the throne of the supreme bishop, not on the same day, but with the same intention. Though the Vatican has never acknowledged this, the recurring alignment between the actions of both groups and the political interests of the Holy See is too frequent to ignore. When a Muslim cleric defied Vatican envoys and was assassinated in the night, the assassins were blamed, but no investigation followed. When a European prince sought to reclaim land held by the Templars, he died suddenly on pilgrimage. Some records suggest the Vatican once deployed dual agents, clergy who bore no title, held no official authority, but moved quietly through secret negotiations. They issued no commands, they simply listened, recorded, coordinated. The Vatican never needed to act with its own hands, it only needed to allow an unsigned letter, a coded gesture in a liturgical chant, a rare absolution, granted for an unorthodox act, and then an assassination, a shift in territorial control, a secret gone forever. In the deepest vaults of the Vatican, areas almost no one is permitted to enter, there are drawers without labels. According to a 19th century librarian who briefly worked in the archives, one such file bore the title Duo Umbrae, the Two Shadows. Its contents remain unknown, but the name alone has chilled generations of scholars. Perhaps the Vatican always understood no power survives for long without the ability to divide and control. Perhaps they carefully nurtured just enough hostility between the two, while leaving secret paths for them to come closer when needed. Across blood-soaked centuries, only one force never lost its grip on power: the Vatican. The Templars were burned. The assassins faded into myth. But the Vatican remains, unchanged, never blackened, never forced to explain, because they never played the game directly. They simply built the stage and let the pieces wield their blades or shake hands. Traditional historians have long painted the Templars and the assassins as mortal enemies, fire and water, sworn to destroy each other. But deep within the ancient stone walls, where no light ever reached, a different truth has slowly emerged. They once traded with each other, not in public, not loudly, but with enough precision that both sides got what they needed and understood the price of silence. According to an old Syriac manuscript discovered at the Mar Musa monastery in Syria, one passage recounts a monk's quiet confession. "I saw a man in a white cloak with a red cross exchange with another in a black turban carrying a curved blade. They did not greet each other with word, but with a map. That was one of the first things exchanged between the two, not to divide territory, but to better understand the landscape of common enemies or to avoid unnecessary confrontation. The assassins had a web of informants embedded in markets, monasteries, and harbors. The Templars used pilgrims, merchants, even priests as cover for their spies. Each side knew things the other could never access alone. Over time, what they traded grew more complex. One note from the Templar fortress at Crac des Chevaliers describes a smaller trebuchet that launches farther, based on a design obtained from a man with no emblem but the voice of the East. The design appeared in no European military texts of the era. Meanwhile, on the assassin side, signs point to their use of advanced light weapons, reinforced crossbows, slow-burning explosives, spring-loaded blades, technologies unfamiliar to the Islamic world, yet not obtained through war or trade. This was no friendship. It was a silent pact between two shadows who understood each other's boundaries. A nod in the night, a wooden box left behind a collapsed wall, a wordless glance at a city gate. They didn't need to speak. They understood. No one knows how often these exchanges happened, but the traces remain, strange schematics unmatched by known medieval engineering, war tools that appeared and vanished, operations once thought improvised, executed with near supernatural precision. Modern scholars call it the hidden current of Crusader knowledge, but a few, the ones brave enough to look deeper, believe it proves something history has long tried to bury. The Templars and the Assassins did not only clash. They once collaborated through something no war can produce: intellectual exchange. And that may have been the Vatican's final boundary, because when two powers learn to share knowledge, they no longer need a middleman, and at that point, the entire game changes. Deep within the Vatican's secret library, there is a particular wooden shelf, unlabeled, unindexed, and accessible only to those of the highest cardinal rank. Upon it, tucked among forbidden scriptures, excommunicated texts, and ancient banned scrolls, rests a small roll of parchment, tightly bound with wax-infused red thread. Its only name, Jerusalem, 1190. No one knows how it arrived at the Vatican, who brought it, or why it has remained sealed for over 8 centuries. But what has long unsettled even the most senior clerics is not the content itself, but what's stamped at the top of the scroll, a red Templar cross and a black circle crossed by a curved blade, the secret symbol of the assassin. 2 emblems that should never coexist on a single document, and yet here they are, side by side, silent, waiting. According to Silvano Ventresca, the last known librarian to have touched the scroll, in the year 1897, its contents were brief, but every line was a dagger to the heart of what we call official history. The scroll, he claimed, described a secret meeting between representatives of the 2 orders held on the outskirts of Jerusalem at the height of a brutal campaign. No clergy, no kings, no witnesses, only a forgotten underground stone chamber, once perhaps a temple to Baal before the age of Judaism, where 2 men exchanged oaths by dropping blood onto a single piece of sheepskin parchment. The agreement did not concern territory or war. It centered on something far more dangerous, the control of information. Specifically, they agreed to share a list of political and religious leaders manipulating the people for personal power, routes transporting weapons and gold between Europe and the Middle East, archaeological secrets buried beneath Jerusalem's sacred sites, truths that, if exposed, could shake the foundations of the world's great religions. And finally, the line Ventresca said he could not bear to read a second time. From this day forward, he who breaks this balance shall not die by sword, but be erased by history itself. After reporting to the Holy See, the scroll was permanently sealed and buried in the deepest vault of the secret library, a place reserved for materials deemed a threat to the foundation of global faith. From that moment on, no one spoke of Jerusalem 1190. All related documents were confiscated. Scholars involved were reassigned, and Ventresca himself vanished after what was described as a pilgrimage to southern Italy. He was never seen again. What's more terrifying than the scroll's existence is the Vatican's fear of it, because if the document is real, then everything we believe about those 2 legendary orders, about good and evil, light and shadow, may have been a carefully staged performance a play whose writer never appears. Only the consequences are real, and history, once again, falls silent. Medieval assassinations are often described as products of religious hatred, power struggles, or endless cycles of vengeance. But those who have studied the patterns, who looked at how the victims were chosen when they were eliminated, and who benefited from their deaths, all come to the same chilling realization. This wasn't random violence. This was an order. The assassins were long feared for their uncanny ability to reach the unreachable. They struck down leaders inside sacred chambers, left daggers on kings' chests within their own fortresses, bringing down the untouchable in mere seconds. But what truly terrified the powerful wasn't the blade. It was the question. Who gave them the list? In an old Latin record, hidden beneath the stone floor of an abandoned monastery in Provence, one brief but haunting line was found. The man who will die tomorrow once denied land to the temple. His name was spoken between the stone walls. We did the rest. That account matches the mysterious death of Duke Henry of Toulouse, a noble who had openly criticized the Templars for excessive taxation and accused them of hiding illegal treasures. He died during a hunting trip, struck by a single arrow from a direction where no hunters stood. 3 days later, his estate was quietly transferred to a small church, under Templar financial control. That wasn't coincidence. That was settlement. In Aleppo, a famous case still echoes. A cleric known for denouncing all alliances with the West was murdered mid-sermon. No killer was found. But weeks later, a Templar supply depot was built near the border of assassin territory. Without resistance, no paperwork, no invoice. One death, one concession, one favor returned. Modern scholars who trace these seemingly isolated assassinations across 2 centuries have begun to notice a pattern, a perfect political geometry. Not personal grudges, strategic removal to clear a path for a treaty, to bury a secret, to silence a threat before it found a voice. Maybe the Vatican never gave the command, but they knew, they agreed, through silence, and sometimes thin parchment stamped in. Rome simply disappeared en route, as if someone had rerouted history itself. With a small blade hidden in a sleeve, not everyone was a target. Only those in the wrong place at the wrong time. And who knew too much? As for who carried it out, history remains quiet, because the killers never appear. Only the results remain, silent and irreversible. When people think of the Templars, they picture iron-clad knights beneath the banner of the cross, defending the Holy Land with blood and sacred oaths. But that's only the surface. The hidden side, the part few ever mention, was the most powerful underground bank in the medieval world. By the 12th century, the Templars were no longer just a religious military order. They had become a transnational financial empire, linking Christian kingdoms, Middle Eastern territories and regions. Even the Pope's decrees could not reach. Through loans, safekeeping, asset transfers, and managing international exchanges, they controlled what both empires and churches craved most, the flow of money in the shadows. So where did that money go? Some of it flowed to the Vatican. That much is known. Another portion funded fortresses, military campaigns, and pilgrimage routes. But there was one current, never recorded in any ledger. A document leaked from a monastery in Lyon during the 17th century, quickly confiscated by the Vatican, outlined a series of strange transactions between Templar financial hubs in Marseille, Acre, and Antioch. The steep withdrawals had no named recipients, only a cryptic label, Umbra Contractus, the Shadow Pact. Strangely, these funds were always drawn, just weeks before major political assassinations. A high-ranking archbishop who opposed the Crusades, poisoned. A nobleman blocking gold shipments from the east, accidentally shot while hunting. A merchant who owned an ancient map of Jerusalem vanished during a moonless night. No one ever found the killers. But the money always leaves a trail, and that trail led back to the Templars. Many modern scholars believe the Templars didn't carry out the assassinations themselves. They simply funded, facilitated, or cleared the way, and in those shadows the assassins were the hand that struck. What did they get in return? Not gold, but safe passage, inside information, covert escorts through Templar checkpoints, and, above all, silence. An assassination doesn't happen cleanly without someone handling logistics. Who cleared the escape route? Who looked the other way at the city gate? Who smuggled the blade across the border? That was the work the Templars silently carried out, even as they prayed at dawn. This silent complicity was never written into law, but it functioned like a ghostly machine, perfect, silent, and unbreakable, because those who tried to break it were erased from history, name, body, and bloodline. And that is how two supposedly opposing orders created a death bank, where blood was traded for gold and death was financed by prayer. If the Templars were the sword and the assassins the hidden blade, then the Vatican was the chessboard, and on that board the Church was never a piece. It was the one who wrote the rules. No need to wield a sword, no need to sign an order of execution. The Vatican held a power so vast that even emperors bowed. But to preserve that power, they did what every empire throughout history has done. They kept the war alive, and to keep a war alive, two things are needed: hatred and fragile balance. Between the 12th and 14th centuries, there were many times when the Templars grew too strong, or the assassins too bold. But every time one side came close to dominance, a sudden event would tip the scale back to deadlock. Never a total victory, never complete defeat. The Vatican, masters of manipulation, played the perfect triangle. When the Templars demanded autonomous control over eastern territories, the Church rekindled old tensions with the assassins. When the assassins began interfering with trade routes tied to Catholic merchants, the Vatican accidentally leaked intelligence to Western knights, and when both sides paused, seeking common ground, a new threat emerged, conveniently pushing them back into mutual suspicion, division, cultivated like a sacred tree, never allowed to grow too tall, but never allowed to die. In a leaked note from Monte Cassino Abbey in the 18th century, one line reads, "Among those who bear arms, plant the belief that only the Church can keep peace. Once they believe, they will kill for us. And when they kill, we will need them longer." This was the true nature of the triangle. The Templars needed the Vatican for legitimacy. The assassins needed the Vatican to avoid total annihilation. The Vatican needed both, to ensure that history never stood still. When war broke out, the world looked to the battlefield. But the Vatican didn't need battlefields. They needed only to redraw a map, withdraw a blessing, or revoke a pardon, and a fragile accord would collapse. One side would rage, the other would strike, blood would spill again, and the Church's authority would be reaffirmed yet again. The world does not require peace to survive. It only needs to believe that peace is possible if it listens to the one who stands in between. And so the Vatican, from within its ancient stone walls, became the true center of every blood-stained road. Every deal made in the shadows carries the scent of danger, the scent of oaths no one can verify, of handshakes without witnesses, and of betrayal, scripted from the start. When the Templars and the assassins first exchanged information, they believed they were controlling the game. When they shared maps, resources, and even technology, they thought they were the ones gaining the upper hand. But they forgot one truth. Every hidden alliance only lasts as long as it serves a greater power, and that power was the Vatican. No one knows exactly when the silent bond began to fracture. Perhaps it was after an assassination that went too far. Perhaps it was a shipment of gold that never arrived. But the real fuse was lit when both sides began to believe they no longer needed the other. The Templars, with their vast financial network across Europe, began to think they could manipulate even the Pope. The Assassins, with their silent reach deep into Islamic courts, began rejecting contracts from the West. And the Vatican? They simply watched and waited until one day the knife was placed in the right hands. King Philip IV of France, buried in debt to the Templars, received a quiet suggestion from Rome that perhaps it was time to eliminate a group too powerful and too lacking in piety. Meanwhile, in the east, assassin fortresses fell one by one, not to their sworn enemies, but to Muslim armies that had once received silent support from Vatican envoys. The Templars were arrested, tortured, and burned. The assassins were erased from maps, leaving behind nothing but rumor. Neither saw it coming, because the ones who struck weren't their enemies, but former allies who had once nodded silently in the dark. The Vatican never had to say a word. They simply withdrew protection. No protest. No intervention. And the whole structure collapsed, like a paper tower, when the wind is summoned at just the right moment. The cruelest part isn't that the Templars and Assassins were destroyed. It's that they were destroyed by the very alliance that once kept them alive. When two underground forces believed themselves the masters of the game, they forgot the one eternal truth. The stage never belongs to the actors. It belongs to the writer. And that writer was always seated behind the velvet curtain of the Vatican. And so the game ended. A board with no king, no victory, only charred pieces left behind, and one figure still standing, alone, untouched, among the ashes. In the shadows of history, there are documents thinner than air, yet heavy enough to make entire dynasties tremble when revealed. For centuries, people believed the Vatican merely watched from a distance as the Templars and the Assassins clashed, observing, judging, blessing, or condemning. But leaked records from the deepest archives of Europe reveal a different truth. The Vatican didn't just know, it gave the orders. One ancient Latin manuscript discovered in 1921 inside an abandoned monastery in Austria bore a single title, Mandatum ex umbra, a mandate from the shadows. On the first page, a faint seal of Pope Innocent III, arguably the most powerful pope of the medieval era, known for launching the Fourth Crusade and personally intervening in religious wars. The content never directly names assassins or Templars. Instead, it refers to cryptic phrases like, those who hold blades in the night, more loyal than bearers of the cross. Those in white cloaks, hiding ambition darker than coal. Use when needed, discard when no longer useful. But one line struck terror into scholars. From the Holy See let word be sent to Masyaf. The marked one must now find his final rest. Beneath it, 3 dots arranged in an inverted triangle, a symbol used exclusively in the Vatican's secret communication system during the 13th century to mark unspoken directives. In another document, held by the Benedictine order and seized by the Vatican after World War II, there is a note about a secret meeting. 3 envoys from the Holy See, a man believed to be a Grand Master of the Templars, and 1 unnamed figure from the East. The meeting occurred on the island of Cyprus in 1212, coinciding with a wave of assassinations and internal purges across Europe and the Middle East. This was no coincidence. Independent scholars have cross-referenced dates and events and found that every secret order sent from Rome was followed by a mysterious disappearance. A British nobleman about to publish documents on Templar finances suddenly dropped dead. A local leader who resisted assassin influence fell during a pilgrimage. A priest who questioned the strange ties between both groups was exiled and vanished from all records. The Vatican has never acknowledged the existence of such mandates, but the scattered notes, margin scribbles, and scorched vellum seals, they still remain, like embers that refuse to die. Because truth doesn't need to be accepted to be real. It only needs enough people to die for it, enough to fear it, and enough to bury it. And if the Pope once gave the command, then this world is no longer divided between good and evil, only between decrees and commands. Some preached from the pulpit, others whispered behind cold stone walls. People often imagine spies as masked figures in disguise, lurking in the shadows of society. But in the Vatican's game, a spy wears a white robe, holds a Bible, and begins every sentence with, "May the Lord be with you." The uncomfortable truth: many clergy in the medieval era were not just preachers of faith, but instruments of surveillance, infiltration, and manipulation. Driven by an insatiable thirst for invisible power, the Vatican realized early on that the most effective way to control the Templars and assassins was not through force, but from within. Not with weapons, but with manufactured faith. With confessions weaponized, with ears that listened but never forgave. In a secret monastery near Avignon, according to a leaked document from the Carthusian order, there once existed a covert training program known as Project Vox Dei, the voice of God. But this voice was never meant for the public. It was crafted to mimic holiness, to earn trust from deep inside organizations the Vatican couldn't openly control. They were taught to speak like monks, but think like assassins, to lead with faith, but report every whisper, to befriend and kill when necessary, without a trace. One of the most successful missions is subtly referenced in notes from Monte Oliveto Maggiore Abbey. A priest named Brother Anselm was sent by the Vatican to a Templar stronghold in Sidon. He served as a preacher for 4 years. Then a high-ranking Templar commander died from consecrated wine poisoning, and Brother Anselm vanished from all records. Meanwhile, in the East, assassin fortresses occasionally welcomed Western scholars researching theology, a phrase frequently found in Vatican's secret files. Some of these scholars never returned, but were never declared dead. They simply dissolved into the organization, living as one of them, while every night encoded messages traveled back through hidden relays embedded in monastic cells. No one knows how many agents truly existed. But one thing is certain: both the Templars and the assassins made critical decisions based on misinformation, leaks, and careful manipulation. And with each misstep, the Vatican gained ground. Those sent by the Church required no reward. They have no tombs, no relics, no medals, just a brief line in a restricted file, embedded, active, effective. And so the Vatican had eyes in every fortress, ears in every secret chamber, and a hand in places even God no longer looked. No one knew who they were, because they never acted like spies. They only smiled gently, folded their hands in prayer, and quietly walked away, leaving behind a change no one noticed had already begun. In the Catholic faith, baptism marks the beginning, a sacred rite to cleanse the soul, welcoming one into the community of believers under the light of God. But there are rituals never recorded in the Bible, never performed at the altar, and never witnessed by a congregation. They are carried out in cold, stone chambers, by candlelight, and whispered only by a name no one dares speak aloud. Initium silenti, the beginning of silence. According to notes pieced together from scorched fragments found in the Erfurt library, this ritual was never meant to save the soul, but to bind a person to a shadow network that crossed all religious boundaries. Those chosen didn't belong to any one order. They could be knights, scholars, merchants, or even assassins. This baptism contained no cross, no holy water, yet its structure mirrored the sacred ritual closely enough to deceive outsiders. And even the initiate, it preserved just enough formality to appear legitimate if ever discovered. The participant was asked 3 questions. Do you renounce false light to face the true darkness? Will you pledge loyalty not to a man, but to an unnamed mission? Will you remain silent, even as your soul burns? If they agreed, they placed a hand upon a small stone tablet. No crucifix, no curved dagger. Only a circle carved with 3-pointed breaks. A symbol said to represent the triple forces, the Vatican, the Templars, and the assassins. There was no oath, no prayer, only silence. And that silence was the vow. Only one surviving copy remains, handwritten by an exiled cardinal in the 17th century, describing how this ritual was used to initiate those who were clever enough, devoted enough, but could never publicly belong to any one faction. They became eternal intermediaries, ghosts who moved freely between fortresses, monasteries, and hidden outposts, never named in history. Some documents even hint that high-ranking leaders of both the Templars and the Assassins had once undergone the ritual, which explained how underground ties between the 2 factions lasted decades without detection. Naturally, the Vatican never acknowledged its existence, but manuscripts describing non-canonical baptisms have been sealed away by the Vatican Library under an edict titled Ad Perpetuum Silentium, for perpetual silence. And so, one of the most sacred rites of mankind was twisted, not to save souls, but to bind individuals into an alliance with no name, no banner, no country, no god, yet holding more power than any throne ever built. Once inducted, they were no longer knights, assassins, or priests. They became something else, guardians of an invisible order, or perhaps holy sanctioned killers in disguise. There is something strange that has been happening quietly for centuries, a vanishing act so subtle, so meticulous, that most never even notice. Manuscripts referencing secret meetings, forbidden alliances, and unnamed pacts have steadily disappeared from libraries, monasteries, and archives across Europe and the Middle East, not all at once, not loudly, but piece by piece, as if someone were peeling away history's memory, 1 page at a time. At the Royal Library of Aragon, there once existed a map showing hidden routes between Templar fortresses and assassin strongholds. Its markings were drawn in a script belonging to no known language. In 1754, when a group of scholars came to study it, they found only a blank sheet, but faint impressions of ink remained, as if scrubbed with acid. When asked, the librarian simply said, "No one took it. It disappeared on its own." At the Islamic-era Library of Alexandria, ancient Persian documents detailing exchanges between the assassins and cross-bearing monks mysteriously burned in a midnight fire, despite the building being guarded around the clock. A monastery in Germany, once home to the Sidon collection, 17 12th-century manuscripts sealed by both Templar and Eastern monastic orders, was abruptly shut down in 1839 after a scholar vanished while researching the material. The Vatican cited structural renovations and sealed the archives. They have never reopened. So the question is no longer why are these documents disappearing, but rather who holds enough power to erase them everywhere, the same way, with the same outcome and without a sound. We speak of fires that consumed Alexandria, wars that leveled Baghdad, pillagers who burned books in Constantinople, but few dare to confront a quieter destruction, one that is deliberate, systematic, and chillingly precise. In a handwritten note hidden at the bottom of a chest in Florence, a 16th-century scholar wrote, "I once touched that document. The next day, I was expelled from the academy. 3 days later, my home was ransacked. 7 days later, no one spoke my name again. He ended with one trembling line. The manuscript did not burn itself. Someone would not allow it to exist. When memories are severed from the current of history, truth becomes indistinguishable from myth, and that is the ultimate form of power, not to control events, but to control what is remembered about them. The Vatican has never admitted to erasing a single document. Yet it remains the world's greatest repository and the strictest gatekeeper. Some call it defending the faith. Others call it burning history without fire. And when history is stripped from the hands of mankind, truth becomes the one thing that no longer has the right to exist. No secret alliance lasts forever, especially when trust is built on silence and loyalty becomes only temporary. When whispers of a connection between the Templars and the Assassins began to spread from the Holy Lands back into Europe, when younger leaders started asking, are we serving an ideal or are we being used? The quiet storm began brewing from within. Inside the Templar fortresses of Acre and Tortosa, a wave of suspicion rose against those seen as too sympathetic to Eastern heresy. One commander, Sir Galin Dumort, was executed behind closed doors for allegedly trading documents with a man outside the faith. No evidence, no public trial. Just a blade in the dark and a head that rolled before sunrise. At the same time, within the assassin fortress of Masyaf, two high-ranking members were poisoned after being accused of leaking corridor map routes to a stranger in a monk's robe. Western intelligence later confirmed they had both undergone the secret rite of Initium Silentii, a silent baptism meant to bind all three powers as one. It was as if someone had lit both ends of a fuse and let the fire consume them from within. Templars began purging those drawn to Eastern philosophies. Assassins hunted down those suspected of trading loyalty for Europe's white gold. Everything pointed to betrayal. But when you looked closer, the orchestration became terrifyingly clear. A rare Vatican archive copied in 1472 by a Dominican monk bore a chilling title, Fiat Scindere, Let Them Divide. The document described a covert strategy approved by one of the most secretive councils of cardinals in history. Plant false information inside both orders. Leak it selectively to trigger internal reactions. When paranoia takes root, clean up what's left. Every step matched the events that followed: the quiet civil war, the unexplained executions, the collapse of contact between hidden cells. No formal battle was needed, just enough doubt sown in the dark, and the two forces that once coexisted beneath the shadows would tear each other apart. The Templars believed the Assassins had betrayed them. The Assassins were sure the Templars had sold them out. Neither looked up to the pale, gloved hand pulling the strings from beneath the long, white cloak. And the Vatican, one final time, was not the one caught in the middle. They were the one who ended it all, without a sound, without an arrow, just a whisper, sharp enough to kill an empire and cold enough to bury a legend. Every empire born in the shadows is built on blood, but only one man ever inspired fear, not with force, but with sheer will. Hassani Saba, founder of the Assassins. The man whose enemies called him the Old Man of the Mountain. When he died in 1124, the Assassins were far from a global force. But the seed he planted had already taken root, not in soil, but in the fears of empires. They say he died in solitude, inside the fortress of Masyaf. No grand funeral, no public will, just silence. But there are whispers of one final letter, not written for his followers, but for the Templars. It sounds like legend. But in the early 20th century, a strange document was uncovered at the Santa Maria delle Grazie monastery. A note, written in Old Latin, said to be the account of a Templar envoy who travelled to Masyaf in the summer the old man passed. The note carried no official seal, only one title: de ultima verba. Of the final words, it read, "We are all men who hold knives for others, but when the blood dries, only those who hold memory win. If you wish to survive, trust not the one who stands between light and shadow, for he belongs to neither. I leave behind no relics. Only one question. What will you do when the one who writes history holds not a pen, but a key?" Some scholars dismissed it as forgery, but within the Annales Occultae, the Templars' Dark Chronicle, there is mention of an unofficial journey to Masyaf, dated precisely to the year of Hassan's death. Why would the Templars go there? To negotiate, to threaten, or to receive a final message? One detail stands out. After Hassan's death, a small group of Templars abruptly withdrew from their operations in Tripoli and moved north, where they built a fortified monastery that never appeared on any map. Inside that monastery, according to scattered records from the 1600s, there hung a stone plaque carved with a single line. "We were warned." Warned of what? And why heed the words of a man the Vatican had long branded a heretic? Perhaps, even in a world of blood and shadows, there are truths so deep. Both sides can see them. Truths that have nothing to do with blades or banners, but everything to do with the one no one suspects, the one standing at the back, whispering prayers while pulling the strings. Hassani Sabah is dead, but the question he left behind still hangs in the air. And maybe that question was his true will, not written for the world to admire, but left for those who were once his enemies, yet, in the end, were the only ones who truly understood him. March 18th, 1314. Beneath the Pont Neuf Bridge, on the banks of the Seine, a man in a white robe stood bound to a wooden stake. The crowd watched in silence. The flames had begun to rise. He was Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, condemned by the Pope and the King of France as a heretic. But as the fire licked his knees, he did not scream, he did not beg, he did not cry. He simply turned toward Notre Dame Cathedral, and according to faint historical notes, spoke a strange final sentence. "The truth lies beneath our feet. No fire can burn memory." For centuries, that sentence was seen as a metaphor. But in the early 20th century, when archaeologists unearthed a sealed basement beneath the old temple fortress in Paris, they found something unexpected: a stone chamber etched with Templar symbols, and at its center, a half-charred wooden box. Inside, a manuscript with its edges scorched, but its words still legible. The first page read, "Testamentum de lux occulta," the testament of the hidden light. No author's name. But at the very end was a familiar mark, Jacques de Molay's personal seal, a horizontal sword beneath a shattered cross. And in that text he spoke not of gold, not of relics, but of one man, Hassani Sabah. I once heard the final words of the man the church called a heretic, but it was his words that woke me up. If he was right, then we, the Templars, have been pawns on a chessboard none of us can see. And if the Vatican fears anything, it is this, that Templars and assassins might one day realize we were both being played by the one who holds the Bible and the keys. I leave behind a map showing the hidden points of contact between both sides. I leave a list of monks who no longer serve God. I leave evidence, not for revenge, but so that someone, someday, might overturn the board. No one knows what happened to that map or that list. Some say the Vatican seized it immediately. Others believe those who discovered it vanished, just like so many ancient scrolls that disappeared from history. From Paris to Rome, Jerusalem to Masyaf, de Molay's legacy lives on, not in the curse he may have uttered as he died, but in what he left behind, where there were no priests, no popes, only stone, dust, and a truth sealed shut. They burned him alive, but they could not burn memory, because some fires don't just destroy flesh. They ignite a light that darkness never wants to see. There was no alliance, no pact, no record proving that the Vatican ever had ties to heretical groups. That has been the official stance for centuries. From medieval popes to modern-day press secretaries, the Vatican has stood behind a wall as solid as stone, the guardian of faith, the beacon of light in a chaotic world, untouched by those who used blood to spread their message. But the truth doesn't need to speak to exist. Paper cannot all be burned, and stone never lies. In 1991, a leak from within the Vatican's archives revealed a hidden vault known as the Archivum Crypticum, the Forbidden Archive, not listed in any public catalogue. Off-limits to the faithful, off-limits to scholars. Only a handful of senior cardinals were ever granted access. And inside, they found what the Church had never, and perhaps would never, admit. A hand-drawn animal skin map showing the movements of envoys from Rome to Masyaf through Acre and Tripoli, sealed with red wax, bearing the double-key sigil, the emblem of papal authority, a document written in a strange blend of Arabic and Latin, detailing a three-party negotiation between Vatican emissaries, assassin leaders, and a high-ranking Templar commander. Scrawled in the margin, balance must be preserved, no side may be allowed total victory, and most startling, a modified Bible. Its handwritten appendix inked in red read, "And the Lord said, let the hands that wield swords watch each other in fear. The third shall rule by prayer." These records were never made public because those who tried met strange accidents, sudden resignations, or vanished without a trace. One Jesuit priest secretly photographed 2 pages and mailed them to an independent archive in Prague. 6 months later, he was declared voluntarily relocated to a remote monastery, no forwarding address. These secrets persist not because no one knows, but because too many are afraid to confirm them. Because if the Vatican once stood between the Templars and the assassins, not as a peacekeeper, but as the director of the play, then every relic loses its sanctity. Every ritual becomes theatre, and every prayer just an echo in history's grandest performance. Outwardly, the Vatican still denies it all, but in the deepest layers of its soil, where the stone still holds markings no chisel dares to erase, the truth remains, silent, stubborn, refusing to be forgotten. Not all wars begin over disputes. Some are waged to bury memory. In the early 14th century, after decades of silence, Pope Clement V suddenly issued the bull Pastoralis Preeminentiae, ordering the arrest of all Templar members across Europe. Around the same time, Eastern scholars began noticing a similar purge. Assassins in Alamut, Syria, and Persia were being hunted down ruthlessly, not only by local dynasties, but by armed groups led by pilgrimage priests from the Christian West. Why would the Vatican seek to destroy the very forces it had once secretly allied with? The answer may lie in just 2 words: clean up. Independent historians have observed that the timing was no coincidence. In 1305, a closed council was held in Avignon, attended by 3 members from orders with access to the Archivum Crypticum, the Vatican's forbidden archive. 3 years later, coordinated heresy purges erupted, but they did not strike cathedrals or cults. They targeted the precise strongholds that once served as the nexus between the Templars and the assassins. Classified Vatican documents include a chilling directive, Delenda Memoria, erase the memory. It appeared as a red seal on internal orders detailing the destruction of fortresses, the burning of documents, and the silent elimination of witnesses, not for heresy, but for knowing too much. One faded record from a Franciscan monk in France reads, "I saw a list of 112 sites marked for erasure, not places of worship, but vaults where forbidden meetings once left their trace. Among them, the Assassin, fortress of Masyaf, the Temple Monastery in Paris, the Chapel of Santa Lucia in Bologna, and even a crypt beneath St. Peter's Basilica in Rome." What were they hiding? Documents, treaties, or fragments of an alliance never written into any holy scripture? After the purges, the Vatican declared a simple truth. There are no more Templars, the Assassins, an Eastern myth. History needs order, not confusion. But it is precisely that surgical cleanliness that chills the soul, because no crime disappears that perfectly unless the one erasing it is the one rewriting it. No more maps, no more pacts, no letters between leaders. Only fragments remain, torn, burned, or encrypted beyond recognition. The Vatican denied all involvement, but its actions resembled not the panic of a fugitive, but the precision of someone burning the forest not to escape, but to erase their own footprints. When the two hands that once held the blade were severed, the one who gave the orders needed no sword at all, only silence. Amid the sea of blood, ruins, and deadly silence left behind by the purges, the world believed no one survived. No more Templars, no more assassins, no one left to speak of what truly happened. But a strange record found in an old library on the island of Malta, written by an anonymous 15th century monk, opened a narrow crack in the perfect darkness the Vatican had so carefully constructed. "I saw him board a ship on a moonless night. He brought no family, no treasure, only two things, a scroll wrapped tightly in linen, and a chest strap carved with two overlapping emblems, the Templar cross and the crescent blade of the Assassins." Who was he? His real name was never recorded, only the nickname the island's fishermen whispered when they glimpsed his silhouette at dawn, standing atop the cliffs, the keeper of memory. According to the account, he lived in isolation on a high hill, speaking to no one except a little orphan girl he raised as his own. And then one day, they were gone. Their hut was found empty, except for a scrap of cloth pinned to the wall, with a rusted blade bearing a single line written faintly in charcoal. The two worlds were never at war, only forced to believe they had to kill each other. Modern researchers believe he may have been one of the few remaining triangular liaisons, individuals once trained by the Vatican to secretly maintain communication between the Church, the Templars, and the Assassins. When the network collapsed, he chose not to fight, but to vanish, carrying the final proof. Rumor has it, his small boat reached the North African coast, where an ancient Islamic monastery, once a hidden supply post for the Assassins, welcomed him. A 17th century Moroccan scholar wrote in his journal, "An old man came to us wearing both emblems on his chest. He did not ask to be remembered in history. He asked for one thing only: let someone, someday, read what was burned." No one knows how much longer he lived. No one knows where the scroll ended up. Only this: from the 16th century onward, a strange dual symbol began appearing, on monastery walls, in woodcut prints, even etched into the bottom of communion cups in quiet Italian villages. Two symbols, no longer in opposition, but joined as one, not to claim power, but to remind the world that truth once had a chance to exist, before it lost the last soul willing to speak it. The Vatican may have wiped nearly everything, but as long as one person survived, carrying that memory across the sea, history, though buried, was not yet dead. And for those who come after, if they are wise enough to see, they'll understand that the silence we live in today is but the leftover dust of a game we were never allowed to see in full. In 1936, as Europe trembled beneath rising political undercurrents and shifting axes of power, a group of Jesuit scholars from the Vatican was granted access to parts of the underground archive system, areas that had, for too long, been left untouched. The investigation was meant to be routine, a reorganization of disordered medieval manuscripts displaced by wars. But after 3 days of continuous surveying, the team reported a discovery: a marble corridor sealed by a black iron door, no handle, no hinges, and no record in any architectural schematics. Above the door, a single symbol was etched, deep and cold, plus. The symbol appeared in no known theological texts, but the scholars immediately recognized its components: the mark of hidden knowledge, plus the cross of the Templars, the crescent blade of the assassins. No one knew why the door existed, who had built it, or why it was sealed. With black iron, a material not found in any of the Vatican's documented construction materials, what was certain was this: there was no keyhole, and no one knew how to open it. The head of the investigation, Father Domenico Forelli, later recorded in a personal journal, a document that would only surface after his death in 1972. "I heard a sound echoing from behind that door, not voices, not machines, but like hundreds of pages shivering all at once, as if something or someone was reading, as if the room itself was remembering." The Vatican abruptly shut down the investigation. All members of the team were reassigned to isolated monasteries. Their research was sealed and marked with a single classification: Classificato Nigrum, absolute confidentiality. In 1941, during the chaos of World War II, as bombs neared Italy's borders, many documents were evacuated from the archives. But that room, the key black iron chamber, was never mentioned, as if it had never existed, as if the memory of it had been forcibly erased. And yet, a single blurred photograph remains, taken in secret by one of the scholars. It shows the door itself, with a beam of light hitting the stone just right, revealing a faint inscription near the floor. A library for what no one is allowed to remember. No one ever returned. No questions were permitted, and even now, when asked, the Vatican offers the same answer. There is no such door in the main archives, but some doors do not exist on maps, because they do not lead to places. They lead to memories that even God has chosen to forget. People often believe the assassins are extinct, that what remains is nothing more than Eastern legend, vague, romanticized echoes of a forgotten past. But in 1974, a personal journal was discovered inside an old chest at the Santa Maria di Sti, Monticelli Monastery in Italy. Inside it lay a story never made public, the private account of Cardinal Benedetto Grimaldi, former prefect of the Vatican Library. The journal had no title, no page numbers, only dated entries, written in firm but faintly trembling handwriting, and one line underlined in red. Night of June 11th, 1947. I met someone who does not belong to this era. According to the Cardinal, he was led through 3 sealed doors deep within the Vatican's underground archives to a room known only as Stanza dell'Oblio, the room of forgetting. There he didn't meet a diplomat, not a Muslim scholar, but a man, lean, middle-aged, with long hair tied behind his neck, speaking in ancient Arabic, laced with Latin. On his left hand was a faded tattoo, a curved dagger across a crescent moon. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not wish to negotiate. He came only to say that he remembered. The man introduced himself with a single name, Samir, no title, no family name. But according to Cardinal Benedetto, his eyes resembled those in ancient sketches of Hassan-i Sabah, deep, calm, and sorrowful, like someone who carried the memory of centuries of blood and betrayal. Samir never claimed to be a leader. He made no vow of vengeance. He simply left behind one item, a piece of old leather etched with 2 overlapping inscriptions, one in Latin Memoriae fidelis servus Dei, a faithful servant of God's memory. The other, in ancient Persian, death is not as terrifying as being forgotten. Cardinal Benedetto, a devout skeptic, wrote in his entry, "I once believed history was made of bones and ashes, but that night I saw that history has eyes, a voice, and wounds that never fully heal. I don't know what the Vatican did to his order. I only know he didn't come to threaten. He came to warn." The journal ends just months later. No further entries. Strangely, the cardinal resigned without explanation and lived in seclusion until his death in 1976. The chest containing his journal was locked behind 3 seals, only reopened decades later during a routine archive cleaning. The Vatican has never issued a statement, but the last line in the journal is what chills most readers. "I once believed I was a guardian of faith, but perhaps I was merely chosen to forget." Samir never returned. No one knows where he went. But after that encounter, a series of ancient maps and documents once sealed by the Vatican began mysteriously disappearing. Perhaps someone is piecing together what was buried. Perhaps memory, once awakened, never truly sleeps again. Amid the countless sacred works of art housed in Europe's churches, one painting seems deceptively simple: La Natività Segreta, the Secret Nativity. Painted in the late 15th century, it was long attributed to an anonymous artist from the Florentine school. For decades, it rested quietly in a small chapel tucked away in the mountains of Arezzo, Italy, unnoticed, unexhibited, and forgotten. Until 1981, when a restoration expert uncovered something beneath the surface paint, hidden in the bottom right corner of the canvas: 2 tiny interlocking symbols, a bright red Templar cross and the curved crescent blade of the assassins, so small they could only be seen with a magnifying glass. And that's where the questions began. The color palette, the use of light, the anatomical precision of Mary's hand. They all matched one man's technique, Michelangelo. There's no official proof he painted it, but a torn manuscript found in the Medici Library archives includes a handwritten note attributed to Michelangelo. Death is not the end. History does not live in stories. It lives in the hands of those who know how to hide it. But this was not just a nativity scene. La Natività Segreta did not simply depict the Virgin Mary and the Christ child. In the background, beyond the stable, where light could not reach, stand 2 hooded figures, cloaked and silent, facing each other, each holding an object. Under infrared light, the scene reveals itself. One figure clutches a cross sheathed like a sword. The other holds a tightly rolled scroll. There are no angels, no shepherds, just a child being shielded by both figures, as if protecting something greater than the child himself. A French art scholar, after years of study, wrote, "Michelangelo didn't need to paint the truth. He only had to place it where no one would think to look, and leave it there for the eyes that could see." Mainstream historians dismissed it all. They called it symbolic coincidence or post-period embellishment. But the question no one dares to answer remains: if Michelangelo knew, who told him? And why would he choose a nativity, the most sacred symbol of faith, to hide such a truth? Some believe Michelangelo once saw a copy of the leather scroll left behind by Jacques de Molay. Others claim he met a man in grey robes in Rome in 1496, just months before he began sculpting La Pietà. Maybe he didn't take sides. Maybe he was simply someone who understood one thing: art is the only place where truth can survive without being burned. Today the painting has been removed, its location undisclosed. The Vatican claims it was for preservation, but in the few surviving reproductions, the 2 symbols remain: small, silent, like shadows that never left the child they swore to protect. And perhaps Michelangelo didn't paint just to honor God, but to whisper to the future. Truth does not disappear, it only finds a new place to hide. The modern world likes to think it has moved beyond myth. We believe in data, in evidence, in science. But sometimes, all it takes is one ancient manuscript and one curious mind to make history tremble again. In 1998, at a history symposium in Marrakesh, Morocco, a young Belgian researcher named Dr. Elias Mertens left the entire audience in stunned silence with a single declaration. I have found proof that the Templars and the assassins not only once collaborated, but signed a formal pact, sealed, with the personal insignia of Pope Urban II. He didn't bring the original document. Only 3 scanned images were shown. 1. A seal fusing the Templar Red Cross and the assassin's crescent blade. Another, a handwritten page in Latin, an ancient Persian, and the last, a sea route map from Acre to Alamut, passing through 3 secret supply points, one of them marked Via Sancta, the hidden holy road. Within 24 hours of the presentation, Elias vanished. There were no signs of struggle at his hotel. His passport, wallet, and belongings were left untouched in the room. Only his laptop and the USB drive containing the scans were gone and never recovered. Moroccan police launched an investigation, but nothing came of it. The Belgian government quietly requested diplomatic access, but no new information was ever released. His family received a single handwritten note. No signature, no postmark, just one line. Silence is the only way memory lives long. The years that followed, several academic journals attempted to verify the documents Elias had referenced. None succeeded. Only one shaky video, captured by a student on an old handheld camcorder, survived. In it, Elias can be heard clearly. I don't believe they were ever true enemies. I believe they were made to appear as enemies, but chose to hold hands in the shadows because they both understood one truth. The real enemy always sits behind the throne. And then he disappeared, as if he had never existed. Theories emerged. Was he silenced by extremist groups, eliminated by a force protecting Vatican secrets, or did he step through a door he knew he couldn't come back from? A year later, a strange graffiti appeared behind the stone wall of the ancient library in Alexandria, Egypt. It depicted 2 hands, one armored like a Templar's, one wrapped in leather like an assassin's, exchanging a scroll. Beneath it, in French, ceux qui ont parlé dorment maintenant sous les vagues. Those who once spoke now sleep beneath the waves. No one claimed it, no one dared to erase it. And in future history conferences, the Templar assassin connection was never brought up again. Not because scholars didn't believe, but because they had learned some truths, once seen, are never meant to be looked at twice. Elias Mertens no longer appears in academic directories. His Wikipedia page was deleted in 2006, no explanation given. And all that remains is a single handwritten note from his closest friend tucked inside an old leather notebook. Elias believed that history never dies. It only changes its name and waits for someone else to tell it. More than 8 centuries have passed since the Templar Knights were burned at the stake, and since the last assassins vanished into the nameless mountains of Persia. We thought they were gone. We thought history had closed its pages. But every sealed scroll, every symbol hidden within a painting, every final note left by a vanished scholar reminds us of one truth: to die is not to disappear. It is simply to retreat into the shadows, to survive another way. And if it is true that the Templars and assassins, once cast as eternal enemies, were in fact one and the same, if they once divided the world like two hands gripping the same sword, if the Vatican was not the judge, but the orchestrator, then the question is no longer who won or lost. The real question is who rewrote all of history, and why are all of us, from scholars to ordinary people, still reading a version that's been edited too many times to trust? What remains now is not evidence, but absence. Absence in the archives, absence in the stone walls of ancient churches, absence even in humanity's own memory. And when we look at today's secret societies, the Freemasons, Skull and Bones, the Illuminati, we see new names, but the rituals feel strangely familiar. The symbols, merely evolved versions of the old ones, the black robes, the windowless rooms, the oaths never to be spoken aloud. Perhaps the Templars and Assassins no longer exist by those names, but their will, their hidden structure, and the archive even the Vatican once feared, still circulate within centers of power no one elects and no one controls. And maybe these modern secret societies aren't successors by chance, but part of a plan written long ago when Jacques de Molay and the heirs of Hassani Saba passed a final scroll between them. Maybe they were never enemies. Maybe they were just playing roles, one the righteous knight, the other the invisible blade, and together they carved the same symbol into a basement no light could ever reach, because the greatest truth is not about who was right or who was wrong. The greatest truth is that we were never meant to know the truth, and those who carried memory learned to hide it when no one would ever look. And when secret societies began to appear in the 17th and 18th centuries under the guise of freedom, of science, of new belief systems, we were forced to ask one unsettling question. Where did they really come from? Why do their symbols so perfectly match those of the Templars and Assassins, two forces we were told had vanished centuries ago? Could this not be a simple continuation, but a return? A system that once manipulated history from the shadows, now preparing to do it again, with new names, new faces, but the same design. The journey of the Templars, the Assassins, and the Vatican may end here, but another door is opening. A world where light cannot reach, and nameless hands once again shape the fate of tomorrow. Are you ready to keep going? Into the world of secret societies. If what you've just heard feels like just the tip of the historical iceberg, know that beneath the surface lies far more that's never been revealed. Leave a comment below. Which secret society do you want to explore in the next episode? The Freemasons, the Illuminati, Skull and Bones, or perhaps a name far less known but far more terrifying in its power? Because sometimes what you want to know is exactly what history was designed to hide.